Chapter 1. A Widow at the Edge of the Stars. The trade station hung in the void like a rusting jewel, its hull patched with mismatched alloys from a dozen species, its neon advertisements flickering against the eternal black. Inside, the bazaar never slept. Spices from drowned worlds burned in the air, voices in 100 tongues overlapped, and the hum of the station's life support fans carried beneath it all like a heartbeat. Kilira adjusted the hood of her faded shawl and stirred the simmering broth in her small food stall wedged between a cybernetic repair shop and a vendor hawking alien gemstones. The broth was thin, barely enough to sustain, but it was all she had to sell. Her four-fingered hands moved with practiced precision, though her ridged brow furrowed with exhaustion. Every clink of the pot reminded her of absence. Her husband's laughter silenced on a battlefield, her child asleep in the cramped back room without enough warmth. A shadow fell across the counter. She lifted her gaze and froze. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a flight jacket patched at the seams. His hair was darker than station steel, his skin weathered from alien suns. His eyes, deep, restless, met hers, and something strange happened. He smiled. "Evening," he said, the word soft yet cutting through the marketplace in "smells good." Kilira blinked. Surprised, he spoke to her in trade tongue instead of relying on a translator implant. Few humans passed through this quadrant, and fewer still lowered themselves to eat in a widow's stall. "It is serviceable," she replied cautiously, ladling broth into a ceramic bowl. "It will not please you." "I've eaten ration bars with less soul," the man said, sliding into a seat on the worn bench. His voice carried warmth, unpolished but alive. She set the bowl before him. He placed 2 gleaming station credits on the counter, far more than the broth was worth. Kilira frowned, pushing one back. "You overpaid." "Keep it," he said, lifting the bowl with both hands, inhaling the steam. "You need it more than I do." Her spines bristled at the edge of her neck, a reaction of both offense and confusion. Pity? She despised it. Yet his eyes didn't hold condescension. They held recognition. He slurped the broth as though it were a feast, closed his eyes briefly. "You humans," Kilira muttered under her breath. "Always reckless." He chuckled, setting the bowl down. "Maybe, but reckless isn't always bad." His gaze lingered on her, steady, unafraid of the grief carved into her face. "What's your name?" "Kilira." "Ethan," he said simply, tapping his chest. "Ethan Cole." The station's lights flickered, casting them briefly in shadow. Around them, merchants shouted, machines hissed, and the station groaned as if straining against the void. But in that small, fragile space of her stall, Kilira felt something she hadn't in a long time, an echo of warmth breaking through the cold. She had expected just another customer, another exchange of credits for broth. Instead, the human left her unsettled and strangely seen. Chapter 2. Hunger and Kindness. The next cycle, the bazaar was no less chaotic. Hollow signs blazed in hues of violet and gold. Hawkers shouted over the hiss of steam vents, and a haze of alien incense clung to the recycled air. Kilira stood at her stall with arms folded, expecting the usual dribble of customers, a tired miner, a drifter with too many debts, perhaps a crewman from one of the cargo haulers moored outside. Instead, she saw him, the human, Ethan Cole, strode through the crowd with that same steady, unhurried gait, as though the press of aliens and machinery parted for him by some invisible rule. He carried no weapons, no entourage, only a battered satchel slung across his shoulder. He stopped at her stall and grinned, as though returning to an old friend. "You again," Kilira said. Her voice, flat though her throat, tightened unexpectedly. "Couldn't stay away," Ethan replied, sliding onto the bench. "Your broth's better than half the meals I've had on cargo runs." Her spines flicked at the edge of her neck in disbelief. It is just boiled grain and scavenged root. Maybe, but you make it mean something. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. Humans have a saying, it's not the meal, it's the company. Kilira blinked, unsure whether to scoff or listen. Few had spoken to her, as though her presence mattered. She ladled another bowl, setting it before him with a stiff gesture. Instead of eating immediately, Ethan began talking. He spoke of Earth's oceans, endless and roaring with salt winds, of laughter echoing across cramped ship corridors, of the smell of coffee brewed in tin mugs aboard rusting freighters. His words painted worlds Kilira could almost see. The crash of waves against stone, the warmth of sun filtered through atmosphere rather than station glass. She listened despite herself, her hands stilling over the counter. Your people, you carry such noise, she murmured. We carry stubbornness, Ethan corrected, slurping broth noisily. Noise comes with it. He winked, and she found herself suppressing an unexpected twitch of amusement. The moment shattered when 3 armored figures stalked down the aisle, station enforcers, their plated suits glowing with pale light. The crowd parted nervously. Kilira stiffened, lowering her gaze, her spines flattening against her skull. Widow, the tallest, sneered, stopping at her stall. You've not paid your protection tithe. Kilira's throat tightened. She reached for the pouch of credit she'd scraped together. Barely enough to survive, let alone pay off thugs. Before she could speak, Ethan's voice cut in, sharp and reckless. She doesn't owe you a damn thing. The enforcer turned, his helmet's visor glowing crimson. What did you say, off-worlder? Ethan rose from the bench, unarmed but steady, fists curling at his sides. I said leave her alone. The crowd went still. Kilira's breath caught. Defiance against enforcers was unthinkable. Yet here stood the human, fragile and mortal, bracing himself as though the weight of the entire station meant nothing. The enforcer shoved him hard against the stall. Ethan staggered, then drove his fist into the armored man's faceplate. The impact rang out like a bell. Sparks spat from the helmet's cracked sensor. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Kilira stared, shock burning in her chest. He was insane. He was human. The enforcers growled threats. But Ethan only spat blood to the ground, eyes blazing with a fire she hadn't seen in years. You want to fight? Pick on someone who can hit back. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. The enforcers, snarling, finally withdrew with a promise of vengeance. The crowd dispersed in murmurs, whispers of the reckless humans spreading like sparks on dry kindling. Kilira's hands trembled as she reached for him. Why? She whispered, unable to keep the sharpness from her tone. Why would you risk this? Ethan wiped his mouth, bruised and grinning. Because someone had to. And in that moment, Kilira realized something terrifying. The human was not simply reckless. He was dangerous, because he made her believe again. Chapter 3, Shadows of the Past. The station's artificial dust descended. The sky lanes outside her stall dimming as the great shielding plates rotated to simulate night. A cool draft whispered down the metallic corridors, carrying the scent of ozone and fried oil from distant refineries. Kilira closed the shutters of her food stall with trembling hands, the echoes of the day's violence still vibrating in her chest. Ethan sat on the bench, rolling his bruised knuckles with a rueful grin. The glow from a flickering hollow advertisement painted his face in shifting colors, green, red, blue. He looked exhausted, but his eyes still carried that stubborn light. You are reckless beyond reason, Kilira said at last, her voice low, sharp with both anger and something else she didn't dare name. He glanced up at her. Yeah, well, you should have seen me back on series. Picked a fight with a smuggler twice my size over the last cup of coffee in the outpost. She frowned, her spines rippling in disbelief. You jest. Dead serious. Ethan replied with a shrug. Worth it, though. Best coffee I ever had. The absurdity tugged at her lips, but Kilira forced the expression down. Humans find pride in chaos. Sometimes chaos is the only thing that gets you through, Ethan said, his tone softening. Kilira hesitated, then lowered herself onto the bench opposite him. The market had emptied. Only the hum of coolant pumps and distant clatter of servitors filled the silence. She drew her shawl tighter around her frame. My mate, she began slowly, tasting the pain in each word, was a warrior of the Craith. He fought in the border wars. He never returned. Her voice faltered, her throat tightening. His clan branded me unworthy of their support. A widow with no protector is less than nothing in their eyes. Ethan listened, leaning forward, his expression unflinching. He didn't interrupt with platitudes or pity. He simply waited, letting her grief breathe. I sell broth, she continued, her voice bitter as rust. Barely enough to keep my child fed. Every day I wonder if survival is even worth this humiliation. Ethan's fingers tapped against the counter, restless. Finally, he said, Back home, I screwed up plenty. Lost the crew once because I was too stubborn to change course. Cost me everything I thought I was worth. He looked down at his scarred hands, then back at her. But I learned something. If you're still breathing, you're not done. You don't get to quit just because the universe tried to break you. Kilira's breath caught. No one from her people had ever spoken like that. So blunt, so defiant against despair itself. She searched his face for arrogance, but found only raw conviction. He stood suddenly, examining the coolant pipe that rattled along the back wall of her stall. This thing's leaking, he muttered, pulling a patch kit from his satchel. Before she could protest, he was already smearing resin over cracks, humming to himself in a rhythm that didn't belong to any species she knew. You cannot simply. Sure I can, Ethan interrupted with a grin. Human trick. Fix what you can, laugh while you do it, and keep moving. She stared as the leak stopped, steam no longer clouding the air. For the first time in cycles, her stall didn't groan like a dying beast. Her lips parted, the faintest spark of something. Admiration? Hope? Slipping past her guard. But the spark dimmed as heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. Kilira's spine stiffened. The enforcers were back, this time with more than 3. Ethan turned, jaw tightening. His hand flexed once, then curled into a fist. Looks like the shadows aren't done with us yet. Chapter 4, The Cost of Defiance. The station's underlevels always smelled of rust and fear. Ventilation shafts rattled overhead, dripping condensation onto cracked decking, while a glow of malfunctioning light strips flickered in sickly rhythm. Kilira pressed her back against the wall of her stall as the enforcers emerged from the haze. 6 this time, their armored boots thudding like war drums. Ethan shifted forward, placing himself between her and the threat. His jacket looked pitiful compared to their plated suits, but his stance radiated a kind of raw, immovable stubbornness. The lead enforcer's visor glared crimson. Human, you've disrupted station order. The widow belongs to our oversight. Step aside, and you may yet leave breathing. Kilira's heart hammered. She reached for Ethan's arm, her forefingers tightening on his sleeve. Do not, please. They will kill you. Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't look back at her, but his voice came steady, edged with iron. Let them try. The first enforcer lunged. Ethan ducked low, catching the armored wrist and wrenching it sideways with brutal leverage. Metal scraped metal. Sparks spat as servos strained. The enforcer snarled in pain, staggering back. Kilira gasped. She had seen fights before, but none like this. Humans lacked the genetic enhancement of her kind, yet Ethan moved with a reckless improvisation that defied calculation, turning weakness into momentum, clumsiness into surprise. Two more advanced, batons crackling with stun current. Kilira snatched up a cooking blade from her stall, her alien eyes narrowing. With a hiss, she slashed at the nearest enforcer, scoring across his thigh plating. Not a deep wound, but enough to make him falter. Side by side, human and widow fought. Ethan swung with bare fists in raw fury, his blows leaving dents where reason said they should have shattered his bones. Kilira struck with alien precision, her movements honed by survival and rage long denied. Still, they were outnumbered. A baton struck Ethan across the ribs. He grunted, collapsing to one knee, breath ragged. Kilira cried out, leaping to the side, but another enforcer shoved her back against the wall. Ethan spat blood, then laughed short, defiant, echoing strangely in the metallic corridor. "That all you've got?" Something in his laughter unsettled the enforcers. Fearless noise. No alien Kilira knew would dare provoke death so openly. It gave her strength. With a desperate cry, she drove her blade into the joint of an enforcer's shoulder. Sparks showering the floor. Chaos erupted. Shouts, plasma crackling, fists and steel colliding. The neon light of Bazaar above seeped through the grated floor, casting everything in shifting reds and purples. For one heartbeat, Kilira felt as if they were not prey, but warriors. At last the enforcers retreated, dragging their wounded, spitting promises of retribution. The corridor fell silent but for the hum of machinery and the hiss of leaking coolant. Kilira stumbled toward Ethan. He was slumped against the wall, his breast shallow, his knuckles torn raw. She dropped beside him, her hand hovering just above his chest. "You fool," she whispered, voice breaking. "You could have died." He smiled weakly, eyes half closed. "Yeah, but you didn't." Her throat tightened. In that moment, surrounded by shadows and ruin, Kilira felt something she hadn't in years, an ember of awe glowing hot in her chest. This human bled for her and her child without claim, without clan, without promise of gain. But all carried with it terror, too, for she knew the station would not forgive this defiance, and neither would its enforcers. Chapter 5. The Choice to Believe. Kilira's quarters were little more than a metal box bolted onto the side of the station's mid-level. The walls sweated with condensation from faulty pipes, and the air carried the faint tang of recycled coolant. Yet within it lay the only sanctuary she could offer. Ethan sat slumped on her narrow cot, stripped of his jacket, ribs bandaged with strips of cloth torn from her own shawl. His breath came ragged, each inhale rattling, each exhale shallow. Still, he smirked as though the pain was just another inconvenience. "You humans," Kilira muttered, dabbing at the cut across his brow with trembling hands. "Always throwing yourselves at walls you cannot break." "Sometimes walls give way," Ethan murmured, wincing but refusing to look away from her. "Sometimes they just need someone to try." Her four-fingered hand paused mid-motion. She wanted to argue, to remind him of the futility of defying station enforcers, of the hopelessness carved into her life since her mate's death. But the words caught in her throat, because for the first time in cycles, there was proof sitting before her. The wall had cracked. Her child stirred in the corner, bundled in ragged blankets. Wide alien eyes blinked at Ethan, full of unspoken questions. Ethan managed a smile and raised a weak hand in greeting. "Hey, kid, your mom's tougher than all those thugs put together." Kilira's chest tightened. No one had spoken to her child with such warmth since before the war. "You should not have done this," she said finally, her voice quieter, more fragile. "Not for me. Not for a widow with nothing to offer." Ethan shifted, grimacing as his ribs protested. His eyes, though tired, burned with something unyielding. "That's where you're wrong. You've got plenty to offer. You're alive." She blinked, taken aback. "Alive?" "Back home, "We got a saying," he continued, voice steady despite the pain. "As long as you're breathing, the fight's not over. You think you're broken, Kilira, but you're not. You're still here. That means you get to choose what comes next." Her spines trembled, her lips parting in disbelief. Choice. The word felt dangerous, almost forbidden. Her people believed widows were bound by shame, locked into survival with no future worth dreaming. Yet this human, this reckless, stubborn creature, was telling her she could defy that. "You speak as though hope were simple," she whispered. "Hope's never simple," Ethan said with a faint grin, "but it's worth bleeding for." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the station's engines vibrating through the walls. Kilira looked at him, at the bruises, the torn hands, the stubborn light in his eyes, and for the first time since her mate's death, she felt her chest ache not from grief, but from something dangerously close to longing. She reached out, hesitated, then let her hand rest lightly against his shoulder. "If I dare to believe you, if I chose to hope again," Ethan's smile softened, "then you wouldn't be alone." Before she could reply, a warning klaxon howled through the station, vibrating the metal beneath their feet. Kilira's blood went cold. The enforcers were not done with them, and this time they would come for blood. Chapter 6. A New Dawn Among the Stars. The station quaked as the alarm blared. Crimson strobes painted the corridor walls in jagged pulses, each flash cutting the darkness like a blade. Kilira's child clung to her leg, trembling, while Ethan forced himself upright from the cot. His ribs ached, but the fire in his eyes burned hotter than pain. "They're coming," Kilira whispered, her voice thin as she pulled her child closer. "They will not stop this time." Ethan grabbed his patched satchel, rifling through tools and scrap. "Good," he said, grim determination in his tone. "Because neither will I." The pounding of armored boots echoed through the corridor, growing louder with each second. Kilira's spines bristled. The walls seemed to close in, the recycled air thick with the scent of oil and fear. "Ethan," she began, but the human was already moving. He darted to maintenance hatch, fingers flying as he spliced wires, his hands sure despite the tremor in them. "What are you doing?" "Calling in reinforcements," he muttered. The lights flickered, and suddenly the low whir of maintenance drones stirred above them. Small, spherical machines used for patching leaks and welding bulkheads came alive, dozens of them, their lenses glowing in the crimson haze. The first enforcer squad rounded the corner, batons sparking with deadly current. "Surrender the human," their leader barked, voice amplified by his helm. "And the widow may yet be spared." Kilira felt her knees weaken. Old instinct told her to bow her head, to surrender. But Ethan's voice cut through, sharp and unyielding. "Not happening." He slammed the hatch closed, and the drones swarmed like angry insects, dive-bombing the enforcers. Sparks showered as welding torches scorched armor, cutting wires, blinding visors. The corridor filled with chaos, metal shrieking, plasma crackling, shouted curses in a dozen tongues. Kilira seized her blade, her child watching wide-eyed from shadows. She lunged at the nearest enforcer, her movements no longer hesitant. She struck with fury, her grief transformed into fire. For the first time since her mate's death, she fought not just to survive, but to claim a future. Ethan fought beside her, fists swinging, body screaming with pain yet refusing to yield. His laughter echoed through the carnage, wild and fearless, unnerving the armored giants who could not comprehend a creature so fragile daring to defy them. One by one, the enforcers faltered, retreating beneath the onslaught of improvised chaos. Drones torched their weapons. Kilira's blade cut where their plating was weakest, and Ethan's raw defiance turned the tide. When the last of them stumbled back into the darkness, the corridor lay littered with sparks and smoke. The drones returned to silence, hovering still, waiting for new orders. Kilira collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Ethan staggered beside her, blood on his lip, but grinning as though victory was the most natural thing in the universe. "You're insane," she whispered, half in awe. "Probably," he said, reaching out a trembling hand toward her child. The little one stepped forward, placing a small, ridged hand in his. Ethan's smile softened. "But I told you, Kilira, you're not alone anymore." Her spines trembled, not in fear, but in something dangerously like joy. She looked at him, this reckless human who had bled for her, who had torn hope out of the jaws of despair. And she made her choice. Hours later, as the station's docking bay loomed before them, Kilira carried her child up the ramp of Ethan's battered freighter. The ship's engines rumbled with a deep, familiar hum, promising both danger and freedom. Through the viewport, the stars stretched infinite and unbroken, scattered across the void like a promise. Kilira's throat tightened as she whispered, almost to herself, "You gave me more than a meal, human. You gave me hope." Ethan stood at the controls, turning to meet her gaze. "Then let's see where hope takes us." The thrusters flared, and together they soared into the endless dawn of the stars. The freighter drifted free of the station's gravity well, its hull shuddering as thrusters roared to life. Beyond the viewport stretched an ocean of stars, sharp and cold against the velvet dark. Constellations unknown to human charts shimmered like distant fires, alien and beautiful. Inside the cockpit, Kilira sat beside Ethan, her child curled safely in the bunk behind them. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in cycles, Kilira did not feel trapped by steel walls. She felt the horizon opening. "You realize," she said softly, her spines quivering in the glow of the console lights, "my people will call me traitor for leaving." Ethan leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the throttle, the other brushing hers with quiet boldness. "Then let them. You're not running from them. You're running towards something." Kilira turned, her alien eyes glistening. "And what is that?" "Hope," he said simply. The word lingered in the air, heavier than any oath. Her throat tightened as she placed her hand over his, their fingers interlacing, different shapes, different worlds, but fitting all the same. Outside, the stars stretched into streaks as the freighter jumped to faster than light. Kilira pressed her forehead to his shoulder, whispering words she had thought she'd never speak again. "You gave me more than survival. Ethan Cole, you gave me a future." Ethan smiled, the light of the stars reflected in his weary eyes. "And I'm not done yet." The freighter vanished into the void, carrying with it the fragile, unbreakable spark of human defiance and a widow's reborn hope.